Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Martinez, and on behalf of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art, I want to welcome you to this roundtable discussion today, Perspectives on Algerian Cinema. Thank you for your patience as we're getting settled. The great thing about these types of conversations, as you can see here, we have great friends who haven't seen each other for many years with common interests, and they can't wait to get to it. So I had to just tell them to stop talking here and get up on stage so we could all join in this really robust conversation. Before we begin, Dr. Janetta Betchkol, Director of the National Museum of African Art, would like to welcome you. And before she comes to, I would really like to thank her for her hearty support. I won't let her start yet. Her hearty support for this entire 2011 North African Film Festival.
The top of the afternoon to everyone here. And let me just begin by saying that this series that Jessica Levin Martinez conceived and has executed has been an extraordinary statement of what timing means, or some of us would say, what the ancestors can do. Because this film festival, as you know, has taken place during a period of time that we ought not to be afraid of calling revolutionary time in the very area that we will focus on today. I do want to thank Dr. Jessica Levin Martinez for being such an extraordinary colleague. And I know that Jessica would be the first to say that this film festival, that all of her work as an educator at the National Museum of African Art is a result of teamwork. She's right. And so I want to give a special shout out for our colleague who isn't here. I think that Frank Esposito is not here. But we're filled with volunteers, assistants, and I do want to thank them as well. We feel that we are constantly supported by the Embassy of Algeria. Your Excellency, Ambassador, please know that we really, really do appreciate you and all of our sisters and brothers in that embassy. I want you to know that I, one day, had a visit from the ambassador who issued an invitation. He issued an invitation that I would participate in the 40th anniversary festival of Pan-African culture. That is, 40 years ago, as I'm sure you all know, there was the first. And so the ambassador said that I, and generously, said he, one of my colleagues, could go off to Algiers for this festival scheduled from July 5th through the 20th, 5th through the 20th in 2009. And I'm looking at this panel and remembering, we partied in Algiers. Come on, Daddy, don't deny it. Now, I remember my reaction when the ambassador issued the invitation. Of course, I'm honored. This is the ambassador of Algeria, but I'm thinking, I can't go to Algiers. I just got here. I had just arrived at the museum to serve as its director in March, and now I'm to go in July? Well, fortunately, I came to my senses. Fortunately, I realized that this would be my first ever trip to the continent as the director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art. And in going, I would be able to make a mighty statement. Going to Algeria would affirm that our museum refuses to perpetuate an old, and I would call it a racist notion, that the people who live south of the Sahara Desert are Africans, and they never failed to say, Black Africans. And that the people who live to the north of the Sahara are Arabs. Now, every minute of this festival affirmed that the people of Algeria are proud of an obvious fact. The obvious fact is that, like each of us human beings, we have multiple identities. But among the identities that Algerians proudly proclaim is they are Africans. My participation in that festival gave me the idea that I could keep saying over and over and over again that the National Museum of African Art collects, conserves, presents, that is, through exhibitions, and educates about the visual arts of Africa. We mean from A to Z. That is, from Algeria to Zimbabwe, and of course, down to the Cape of Good Hope. And we also understand at our museum that there must be, if we are doing our work well, there must be conversations, not only about Africa and her visual arts, and by extension, all of the cultural expressions, but that we must invite conversations about the African diaspora, and indeed about Africa and its place in our world. We will see a film about the festival. And so it would really be repetitive for me to stand here and even try to capture for you what it was like. I don't know if these panelists will testify, but I can just say this. It was the most extraordinary gathering of somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 people from all over that great continent, as well as from Brazil and the United States representing the diaspora. Every night was a horrible experience for me. What was I going to do? Which film would I see? Would I go to the theater? Would I have the experience with one of the truly exciting musicians from somewhere on that continent? As a new director of an African art museum, I just finally almost gave up. There were too many exhibitions. But I'm going to say this, that one of the highlights was, of course, an exhibition of skeletal remains of you know who. Mama, most often known as Lucy, the mama of us all. And so I just want to bring closure by saying that being in Algeria for the festival was a dramatic affirmation of the reality that while the people from Algeria to Zimbabwe down to the Cape of Good Hope are clearly Africans, so is every human being. For are we all not descendants from the one and only cradle of humankind? I really want to turn now and just thank my sister, Kathleen, and these amazing brothers for coming and sharing with us on this panel. Jessica.
Thank you, Dr. Cole, for your words. And I'd also like to thank you, Ambassador Abdallah Bali, for your encouragement and your support. And it's just a delight to see you here today. As Dr. Cole said, we have so many people on the NMAFA team to thank. From Gathoni Kamau and Eddie Burke, also interns Julia Bloom, Megan Park, Harper, Bokum Faith, also William Seymour and others. It's been a team effort, and I thank you all. Before I introduce our moderator today, Mbaye Cham, I really want to spend a moment just to praise Lydia Diakate. Really, this could not have been put together in any sense, so I thank you. Lydia is an independent scholar. She is also associated with the gallery, the art gallery at New York University, and really brainstormed with me, made fabulous suggestions, and her ideas helped me to imagine what this could be. So I really, truly want to thank you for that. Also, Howard University for co-sponsoring this event today, the Algerian Ministry of Culture for your kindness, and Mbaye Cham for saying, yes, I'm going to moderate this conversation. I'm going to rule this conversation, and it's a delight to see you here. Dr. Cham is chair and associate professor of African Studies at Howard University. He gained his PhD in African languages and literature from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he's a specialist in African and Third World cinemas, also oral traditions and modern African literature. He's been a jury member on some of the premier panels dealing with African cinema for the Paul Robeson Film Awards, the short film competition of the 16th FESPACO Film Festival in Burkina Faso, and I believe you're headed there this week? This week, for the next festival at FESPACO. Also the Southern African Film Festival. He's been a consultant to UNESCO and the World Bank, and he's author and editor of several books on African cinema, including the now famous African Experiences of Cinema, published in 1996. And Dr. Cham came to the film we screened this past Thursday, a Tunisian film called Baba Aziz, the Prince Who Contemplated His Soul. And I happened to see you on the stairway, and he just looked at me and he said, this film was poetry. And it's just wonderful because he combines his intellectual rigor, thinking about cinema, and a love of movies. So I know we're going to see lots of that this afternoon. So we'll have this conversation. It will then be followed by a screening of the film produced by Ahmed Bedjaoui called Africa is Back. There'll be lots of opportunities for you all to ask questions. And there are 2 audience mics. I encourage you to use them and enjoy. Thank you.
The film was by Nasser Kamir from Tunisia. If you ever come across his work, please look at it. You know, he's my favorite, one of my favorite African filmmakers. Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you, Dr. Cole, Mr. Ambassador. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really an honor for me to be part of this event here. And as Dr. Cole just expressed very, very eloquently, either by design or by pure fortune, this is happening at a time when we are witnessing some really, really momentous shifts in North Africa and throughout other places in that region. And I have no doubt that the events that we're witnessing today will probably provide a lot of material, a lot of narrative material for filmmakers, not just from North Africa, but perhaps from other parts of the continent. Because, I mean, if you look at Algerian cinema in particular, it is one that has drawn very, very productively and has been shaped and influenced to a very, very large extent by, you know, similar experiences that the Algerian people have gone through, dating back from the struggles against colonialism and the more recent internal strifes that had overtaken the country, and some of the other social issues and so on and so forth. So I'm pretty sure that we are going to be witnessing a surge, I hope, you know, with the kind of support that is going to be coming forth, I hope, from the Algerians and elsewhere, you know, going to be witnessing a surge in films that, again, engage in very, very imaginative and artistic ways some of these events that we're witnessing today. My own encounter with Algerian cinema, or cinema about Algeria, as perhaps is the case with quite a few of you, is really from the epic film by Gillo Pontecorvo, Battle of Algiers. that I'm sure all of us have seen or heard or read about. And I believe it's a film that also had a very, very lasting impact on what was going to emerge down the line in Algeria in terms of narratives that engage experiences of the resistance and liberation movement. So from Pontecorvo on, we began to witness a corpus of films that came to be dubbed cinema mujahid, that is cinema of liberation fighters, dating back with the epic also of Lakhdar Hamina, that Chronique des années de Braise, Chronicle of the Years of Embers, excuse me, which was also one of those epic films that really brought the sort of heroism that defined the Algerian struggle to a broader international audience. And that film also won the Palme d'Or, the Golden Palm, at Cannes in 1975, I believe. And from that period on, we, up to today, I guess, we've seen many, many others come in the footsteps of Lakhdar Hamina and others. And more recently, perhaps the work of Rashid Bouchareb, who some of you probably might have seen his film Indigène, Glory, Days of Glory. The actors in that film actually won the prize for the best actor in Cannes about a couple of years ago. And also his more recent film, Hors la Loi, which is showing as part of this festival. But these are films that in one way or the other not only engage aspects of Algerian and African memory and resistance in general, but they are films that also sort of intervene in very productive ways in matters of public policy. For example, with Bouchareb's Indigène, we knew the effect that it had in terms of raising an issue that in France was sort of skirted or tabooed for a very, very long time, the issue of compensation or due recognition of the role that not only North Africans, but also Africans and black people from all over the former French Empire played in the liberation of France. So we're dealing here with a cinema that is really very, very accomplished artistically. By themselves, they are products of exemplary imagination accomplishment. But they are also products that are very significant politically, socially. And I hope that, we'll get a chance to hear from all of the expert panel that we have here, develop some of these elements of Algerian cinema. One interesting recent development also is perhaps what we might see as maybe a new direction or a shift, a different kind of shift in Algerian cinema through the film of Dahman Ouzid. It's a new film entitled Esaha, the Squire. I mean, lately we've heard a lot about squires and what takes place in this film is really, to some extent, I mean, it's a film that I think was done last year, year before last. But there's a certain element of prophetic vision in the film, in what unfolds in this square, especially from the point of view of young people. I have seen trailers of the film. I haven't seen it in full, but it's one of the films that we're judging at the upcoming festival starting later on this week in Ouagadougou. One last point about a point that Dr. Cole also made, the Africanness of Algerians. In the 70s, when Guinea nationalized its cinema infrastructure. And when, again, the French corporation struck by withdrawing the supplies of films that were the source of films that were being shown in Guinean screens, it was the Algerians who really stepped up and began to supply films for the Guinean theaters and cinema circuits. So this is just one example of many other actions that Algerians have taken over the years in terms of their solidarity, their consciousness of the importance of cinema and supporting cinema on the African continent in particular. Let me not go any further because I know you didn't come to hear me. We have here a rare opportunity assembled here, a really phenomenal panel of individuals with experiences that I hope will be able to take full advantage of this afternoon. I'm going to introduce them very, very briefly, because if we are to introduce them in full, I think we'll be here all afternoon. So I'll just say one or two words about each of them, and they will speak in the order that I'm going to introduce them to. That's what I was told, so you guys, okay. Okay, right on my right here is Ahmad Badawi, who is a film critic and a journalist and holds a PhD in film and literature and has worked for several years with the Algerian Cinematheque as well as in Algerian television. He was the cultural attaché for the delegation of the European Union in Jordan, in charge of regional communications from 2004 until 2008. And currently he's advisor to the cinema department of the Algerian Minister of Culture. He is president of the Algerian Film Fund and works also as a professor of institutional communication at the Faculty of Communications and Political Sciences at Algiers University. Danny Glover needs no introduction. But I think we should know that we have here an actor, a producer, a humanitarian, a true internationalist, one whose work really spans the globe, particularly the so-called Third World. Danny is, I mean, it's so difficult to introduce Danny. But let me just point out a couple of things that may not be quite apparent to many of us. He is very well known and respected for his wide-reaching community activism and philanthropic efforts in particular. Internationally, he served as the Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations Development Program from 1998 to 2004, focusing on issues of poverty, disease, and economic development in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. In 2005, he co-founded Louverture Films, which is an outfit that's dedicated to the development and production of films of historical relevance, social purpose, commercial value, and artistic integrity. And currently, he serves as the chairman of Trans-Africa Forum, which is a non-profit global justice organization focusing on conditions in Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. And I just want to add also that Danny is somebody who has really been a major force in African cinema, producing, acting in, and enabling the work of a whole number of filmmakers, ranging from the late Ousmane Sembène to the younger filmmakers, Abrahaman Sissako and many others who are upcoming. Nicholas Mirzoeff is a professor of media and culture and Communication at New York University. He earned his BA honors from Oxford University in Modern History and a PhD from the University of Warwick in Art History and History. His work is in the field of visual culture, which in recent years has fallen into a number of domains, and I'm sure he'll probably be able to develop those in more detail. His current research is, well, he has a latest book, The Right to Look, a counter-history of visuality, which is forthcoming from Duke University Press. And his current research deals with Algerian art, visual culture, and cinema. Mancha Jawara. Mancha and I go a long way. He's from Mali. We have this running joke about Mali. I'm not going to share the details with you.
Gambia.
And it has, it has nothing to do with the Malian referee also, who cost the United States, you know, that gold in the World Cup. I keep reminding you. But Mancha is presently the chair of Africana Studies department at New York University. He was educated in France and later in the United States here. Holds a PhD from the Indiana University, and his dissertation on politics aesthetics of African cinema formed the basis of his very influential text, African Cinema, which was published in 1985. Mancha also works very, very actively in African American, Caribbean, Third World cinema, and published a volume in 1993 entitled Black American Cinema. He's also a filmmaker in his own right, a documentarian. And his latest work is on Edouard Glissant, who some of you know passed away just about a week ago. So probably Mancha was one of the last people to actually talk to him and document Glissant. So we're very grateful for that, Chiamoho. Kathleen, I had the fortune of meeting Kathleen in Algiers also in 2009. And like Danny, Kathleen also really needs no introduction, but I'll say just a few words here about Kathleen. She became quite a figure in the civil rights movement in the 60s while she was studying at Barnard College. And in '67, she began full-time work for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that we know more popularly as SNCC. And in '68, she joined the Black Panther Party and became the National Communications Secretary, and was also the first woman to be appointed to the Black Panthers Central Committee. She lived in exile with her former husband, Eldridge Cleaver, in Algeria before returning to the US in 1975. Kathleen then went on to Yale University, where she graduated in 1983 with a degree in history, and in '88 she received a law degree from Yale University also, and then began teaching at Emory University in Atlanta. Whilst at Atlanta, she served on the Georgia Supreme Court Commission on Racial and Ethnic Bias in the Courts, and was a board member of the Southern Center for Human Rights. She was a visiting faculty at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law, the Graduate School of Yale University, and Sarah Lawrence College, where she served as Joan Woodward Professor of Public Policy in 1999. She was also a senior research associate at Yale University. Kathleen is currently a senior lecturer in law at Emory University. I'm sorry it took a little longer for these opening remarks here. So what I'll do is turn to the panelists, and each one of them will have about 5 10 minutes max to share with us your relationship to Algerian cinema, your observations on Algerian cinema and visual culture in general, and then we will begin to engage you, myself, and also the audience there. Thank you very much.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Mbaye. Well, I will not insist on my relation to Algerian cinema. I made it part of it. And I'm proud of that. But I would like to go back to the days after independence and after my studies, after I graduated from the French Institute Lidec. I came back and I started working at the Algerian Cinematheque. And it was the temple of African cinema at that time. Semben, Djibril Diop, all these people came every month to the Cinematheque. And on the last day of January, we organized at this very same Cinematheque the press conference on Ouagadougou, on the FESPACO. And I reminded that, again, we were the temple, the Cinematheque was the temple of the Algerian cinema. And well, I met Kathleen Cleaver when she was living there while I was working at the Algerian Cinematheque, and you know, she was one of the people who counted in this city, which attracted all the movements of liberation. And I remember in '69, we were, from the Cinematheque, one of the elements which organized, which really took a great part in organizing the first cultural Pan-African festival. But at that time, the participants were 60–70% of the countries were not liberated. They are still under the colonialist rule. And the participants were Amilcar Cabral, or Dos Santos, were people like that who came to the Cinematheque. They were our friends, and this is to say, just to insist on what the director of this venerable, honorable place was saying, the Algerian relation to Africa. It came from there because we really devoted all our efforts at that time to be with the movements of liberation in Africa. And I am just producing a film on this issue, which is called By All Means Necessary, and which is an Algerian South African film, majority of Algeria, directed by Suleiman Ramadan, the big filmmaker, South African filmmaker, and it's evoking the role of Algeria in this, in the liberation of Africa, or at least the welcoming of the movements in Africa. So everybody was there at that time, and in '69 we decided to organize this big festival. Algeria was poor, Algeria was coming out from a very bloody war, but there was such a spirit of commitment, of love for Africa, that it was a big, big success. And I was among the people who called for Bill Klein to direct the film on the Pan-African Festival. And now the film is there, it's still a witness for what happened at that time. And it's telling the story of the Pan-African Festival completely melted with the spirit of liberation. And 40 years later, sorry, I was there also, welcoming all these charming friends. I was so happy. And I had the privilege to be the deputy coordinator of this festival. And in fact, it was a big, big feast, a big opportunity to receive, as it was said before, between 5,000, we don't know even, 5,000 and 8,000. How did we accommodate these people? How did we drive these people? How did we organize all these events? I mean, hundreds of places where you had singing and dancing and showing and exhibitions. But we did it. I don't know how, but it was wonderful. But it was also the renewal of our attachment, of our commitment to Africa, that we are not people who are looking backward. We are looking in front of us, and in front of us we have Africa. We have not Europe. It's not in front of us. It's backward. So this is something that has been missed by many people, but the second Pan-African Festival waited 40 years to be organized, and finally it was Algeria which organized it, who put so much effort, capacities, and we developed, through these two festivals, we developed expertise in terms of exhibition, of organization, of festivals, and everything. And we were also the winners. Look, seen through this point of view, but the reality is that Algeria was coming out from a long, long period of fanatism. And in the film, Africa is Back, which I had also the privilege to produce for the Ministry of Culture and for the Pan-African, our Ministry of Culture, Mrs. Khalida Toumi, was saying something at the end of the film which is very, very emotive. She said, they stole our nights. They were stealing our nights. They were our nights. Because the women, for example, could not go out during the night. At nighttime, they had to go back. And suddenly, during the Pan-African Festival, we had families until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, living in the places and enjoying the concerts and everything. Families, women, men melted. And suddenly we realized that we were in a post-Islamist era. This festival was a step for Algeria. If you want to have a clue to understand Algeria and see what's the difference between Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and everything, is the accumulation of experiences and all these proofs, these trials that we have been through, and we survived. And this is a very important point. For the Algerian cinema, I would like to say that in the last months, in January, we had a film in Sundance, A Few Days of Respite, and we have a film nominated for the Award Academy. There is a big creativity. We have still a lot of problems of organization of infrastructure in cinema, but the problem is that Algerians are artists, and they have this potential, this capacity to create, which is amazing. Look at literature. If you look at people like Mohamed Dib, like Assia Jabbar, I had also the privilege to produce his 2 films, the unique films that she made. I was at the Algerian television in charge of the production department, and I was very happy. It was a wonderful experience to produce the first film ever made by a woman in Algeria, and by somebody who is a big, big author. We look at people like Rachid Boujadra. There is a big activity in the field of arts that is reflected by the Algerian cinema. I mean, when some countries, surrounding countries, can have 20 or for Egypt 100 films, and we have only between 5 and 10 films, that we have 5, 6 films who won prizes in festivals every year. The short films are accumulating so many distinctions. That means that every time we make a film, it's a pressure. It's something, it's an event that cannot be missed. And every Algerian filmmaker would say that. The public opinion was attracted in France, especially by the controversy around, which surrounded the presentation of Outside the Law by Rachid Bouchareb. I would like to remind you also that between Days of Glory and Outside the Law, he made London River. And London River was presented under the Algerian banner in Berlin in 2009, and it was the occasion for Sotigui Koyate, who passed away last year, to win the interpretation, the interpretation of prize in Berlin. And this is also something that we have to say, to underline, that Rachid Bouchareb made another film before, which was called Little Senegal, and then he starred Sotigui Koyate as a central character, representing the Muslim tolerance in London after the bombings in London, and not an Arab or not a Berber or not, but an African. So this is also one of the so many proofs that we are so engaged in the African cinema, in the African story, modern development, and everything. If I had to say something rapidly on the Algerian cinema, on the different steps, I would say that, of course, we have fought and won a big revolutionary war in '62, and the Algerian cinema was marked by this history, and it's still marked by this history, since we have Outside the Law, we have the same issue. But in the middle of the '70s, we had a very important film called Omar Gatletou, who was something different. Suddenly, we had a new generation which was not sharing the same privileges, which had not the same chances to succeed in life, and which was not linked to this revolutionary legitimacy that was prevailing among the oldest generation. And alienation was suddenly accepted through this film by these young people who may become an army, a reservation army for forces which could use them. And of course, we had the development during the '90s of the films and the cinema made by women, like Rashida, for example. It was a striking thing, and now it's developing very fastly. And of course, during the '90s, we had this crisis, this bloody events which occurred in Algeria, and the cinema was one of the collateral victims of this war. But after 2002, the Algerian cinema came back, and it's coming back. And I think that in 2009, with the Pan-African cinema, it was an incentive, and it was suddenly an opportunity for the Algerian cinema to really take off, to leave a new takeoff. And also, we developed during this festival a policy of co-production. We organized the prize, a fund for the Algerian African co-production, with 8 films which have been funded by this fund. But we also co-produced films like Africa, seen by so many artists like Abdurrahman Sissako, like Zizi Gambao, like Teddy Matera, one from 10 major countries in Africa, Sol Carvalho, and giving their view of how they see Africa. So the Algerian cinema is completely inside the African cinema. I cannot see any possibility to part Algerian cinema from the development of the African cinema as a whole, and we do hope that we'll find a solution to create a real, balanced, and reasonable African fund for the African cinema. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think we should take questions. I want to acknowledge Mwiza Mthali, who runs the African Film Festival, Trans-Africa Forum. I would also and he's not from Guinea or Gambia. So
It's neutral.
He's neutral. Let me thank my sister, my she-hero, Dr. Janetta Cole, and her brilliant staff for assembling a most important moment when we can talk about film and culture. And what a moment it is to talk about film and culture as we see the extraordinary manifestations of expression through various other media forms of people standing up and being heard, of people making in the midst of transformation. It's a great time to talk about film. When I think of Algerian films, I remember, first of all, before we get to film, I have to mention the great psychiatrist who spent some time analyzing the Algerian struggle, the most struggle in Frantz Fanon and Wretched of the Earth. My first contact with Algeria as a young student, it was not only required reading, but required discussion that we talk about the Algerian fight against colonialism in relationship to our own struggles that we saw, that we were engaged in here. Those of us who come out of the experience of Kathleen and others, the Black Power movement, were certainly moved by the Algerian struggle as we began to apply those lessons as we reached into our own sense of purpose as well. So Algeria's imprint was much evident. And I'm speaking not from the standpoint of a filmmaker right now initially, because my relationship with film and art first came through my sense of as an activist, as a young student. Went on from there to think about all the memorable photographs I saw of liberation fighters training in Algeria, from Mandela and many of the others. And quotes, as I said to the ambassador, one of the joys that I had of meeting the first president, Mandela, in Venezuela, in Caracas, was certainly one of the persons that I often read and looked up to as a young student. So in framing, giving some sort of idea about my initial relationship with Algeria, which in sense began in film with the film that we all mention when we say the Battle of Algiers, and the incredible space that created in filmmaker, even though the filmmaker Gillo Pontecorvo was Italian, certainly he captured something that captured our heart and our imagination. I would, at this particular point, like to talk about some of the things that I find myself engaged in with my extraordinary producer at Louverture Films, Jocelyn Barnes, which certainly have crossed the paths of not only the work that I've done with Mancha, because part of the reason I'm sitting up here really is because of meeting people, bringing people into my life, such as Mancha Jawara, and our great friend Clyde Taylor, who is now retired. But it was Clyde who really introduced me and others in San Francisco to African films. And not exclusive of films that were from above the equator. And so the great deal that has to be, we have to kind of think about this from a very vantage point of the expressions that are happening in the world right now. And at this particular moment, we were able to accomplish something very, very, I think, significant when Louverture Films became involved in Abdurrahman Sissoko's Bamako, which began as an idea, and we were very instrumental in helping Abdurrahman shape the idea of putting the World Bank and the IMF on trial in Bamako. Even though it was a film specifically that looked at the African debt crisis, but much more also mirrored the crisis as it existed, not only in Africa, but the crisis that exists around the world in the global South, whether it be Africa, whether it be Venezuela, whether it be Egypt, whether it be Tunisia. It's the same crisis that exists in some sense. How art is able to reflect that crisis and also validate the stories of those people most impacted by that crisis is the question, I think, of expression in this new shaping of how we look at cultural work and art as we move on further into the 21st century. Out of that expression by Abdurrahman, I met the great Palestinian filmmaker, Elia Suleiman. Immediately as he became involved in his project, that was screened at the Cannes Film Festival and has gotten a very, very limited audience here in the United States because of the way in which he expresses another vision of the Israeli-Palestinian struggle. To our involvement in the film with Anna Marie Jussour, who was the first Palestinian woman to direct a feature film, and that film being Salt of the Sea. To also our involvement in working and developing the great work of Ousmane Sembène, God's Bits of Wood, which we're in the process of developing as a screenplay. We've also acquired the rights to Abdurrahman Munif's great novel, City of Salts, in terms of putting a portion of that in film. So it finds myself, when we find ourselves at a particular moment as we see these extraordinary expressions that are happening, and mind you, we must be clear about the expressions that are happening in the world. They're not simply the toppling of a dictator. It's more so an expression of people's finding another way in which they can do with the real issues that are happening in the world. If Algerian cinema reflects that, as it seems to be reflected through a great deal of the cultural production that's being produced in other parts of the world, then it services its own evolution, and it services the evolution of not only the Algerian people, but other peoples in the world as well. And I found myself, as I came here to talk about this, as I paid close attention over the last, as many of you have over the last 2 weeks, of what is happening in the region. And what is happening in the regions is going to have extraordinary implications, not simply for that region, simply for all those people who are trying to figure out not only what is this expression of democracy in a sense, but also what is this expression of democracy in terms of a redistribution of resources that allows all of us to participate in the possibilities and reimagine the possibility that exists in the world. Those are some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves as audiences as we approach film, some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves as filmmakers. And I'd often refer to myself not simply as a filmmaker, but a cultural worker, because our work must have value in pushing forward an agenda, which also redirects and redefines what it is to be a human being.
It's a worrying task to be asked to follow Danny Glover and then to lead on to these two distinguished speakers after me. So I shall try and be brief. I'm sure you've all forgotten who I am now, having listened to so I'm Nicholas Mirzoeff, and I teach in the Department of Media, Culture and Communication at NYU. And in terms of the recent events, I think media has played a key role, both in the sense of the way that the events have unfolded and the way they've been represented. And in this country, we've heard a lot of discourse from professional media about how no one could have expected what has happened. And what I would like to say is to counter that argument. I would say one could precisely have expected it. Maybe not at this particular moment, but it's very clear if you look at the history of the Algerian Revolution and indeed Algerian cinema, that something like this was always possible. And the fact that it has taken place using new media indicates that there is now a kind of new cinema being created in North Africa and in the Middle East that actually in interesting ways follows in the footsteps of the radical cinema that was created immediately after the revolution, as has already been mentioned. And I just want to very briefly pick up on a couple of those themes. I also wanted to allow us to disidentify a little bit with some of the ways in which we have all been represented by our media. The columnist in the Washington Post, a man called Richard Cohen, in speaking about Egypt said, "We are not them." Mm-hmm. I would like to say, yes, we are. At least those of us here, we most certainly are them. And we are not that we, which we have been predicated to be. We're thinking back to the particular case of Algerian cinema and its recent histories in the revolutionary period, which I would say begins right on the last day of the Second World War. On the 8th of May, 1945, there was a massacre in Sétif, which is notorious in Algerian history, on the very day that's now celebrated as European Liberation Day across the continent and elsewhere, as if to say to Algeria, there will be no liberation for you. In 1954, the revolution proper, as it were, breaks out in full force, and it quickly takes a visualized form, because Algeria is, if you like, a place on the border between the north and the south, in general sense, and it has remained there. And what took place during the revolutionary period has continued to haunt European Anglo cinema since, and I want to just pick up on a couple of ways in which that has been the case. The revolutionary period saw something one can literally call guerrilla cinema. It's a term we use in cinema studies, but these were people who were actually freedom fighters making film. And in the course of that film, a particular viewpoint emerges, which I think is very striking, and one that continues to emerge in our present period, which is the viewpoint of the child. And Algeria was imagined, obviously, as a new country. It had not yet existed as an independent country. But it was also a very young country in both the terms of the age of its population. I'm speaking now a period in the 50s and 60s, and of course it is again now a country with a very young population. 70% of Algerians are under the age of 30. Many of those are unemployed and feel the urgency of the current moment. I wanted to mention a film that was made during the course of the revolutionary period involving Frantz Fanon, who Danny Glover just mentioned, by a committee called the Maurice Audin Committee, involving Fanon, who was working as a psychiatrist in Tunis with those who had been made refugees during the course of the war. And what Fanon had done was he had used a technique which is now common but was then very innovative to ask children who had been made into refugees and exiles to visualize what had happened to them by making drawings. And he used these drawings in accompaniment with the stories that the children told to make a short film called J'ai 8 ans, I am 8 years old. And J'ai 8 ans refers, of course, to the age of the children themselves, but also refers to the age of the war, and therefore, by extension, to the age of Algeria. Algeria itself was 8 years old at the time. It's a very innovative film. You can actually find it on YouTube, rather amazingly. But it will also be on a website that I'm building about this that you can get off the Duke University Press website. There's not much I could say about this, but it was shown in Algiers after the revolution as part of a program to take cinema out of cinemas into the streets, what we call the ciné-pops movement, the popular cinema. And these were screened using old vans that had been left behind by the French Army Psychological Service, and to say propaganda film vans. But these include remarkable events like screening a Chinese film called The Red Detachment of Women for women only, and there was a popular discussion of that film afterwards. There was a screening of Battleship Potemkin, the famous classic by Eisenstein, for dockers in the Kasbah, who identified with the film because they recognized or felt they did the classic staircase in that film with the famous staircase in the Kasbah in Algiers. More specifically then, a number of post-independence films focused on the place of children in the revolution as actors and subjects. They used non-professional child actors. One of the very early films after the revolution called Une si jeune paix, A Very Young Peace, was made in 1964 by Jacques Charby. Another called L'Enfer à 10 ans, Hell at 10 years old, directed by Gauti Bentadouche. And other films of this kind. And that tactic went straight into Battle of Algiers. You'll remember the young Omar and other young child actors who are non-professionals appearing in that film. Now, the power and the force, it seems to me, of those children's situations, their self-representations through their drawing and their performance, continues to haunt us. You remember that Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth writes a very powerful case study of two Algerian children who killed a French child that they used to play with because it was the only way they felt that they could imagine being involved in the revolutionary struggle. And that account has appeared recently both in a video installation that was made by a very well-known Finnish video artist called Lisa Ahtila. That was in 2007, called Where is Where? And in 2008, in the novel Fanon, by the African-American novelist John Edgar Whiteman, who imagined restaging that scene, but in downtown Pittsburgh, and he imagined it being shot by Jean-Luc Godard, the Swiss, I should say, film director, who famously, of course, shot Le Petit Soldat during the course of the revolutionary period. Those drawings that I mentioned, the drawings by children, occurred again in Michael Haneke's very well-known 2005 film, Caché, or Hidden. Remember this film about the legacies of the Algerian War, in which the hidden past of Algeria continues to re-emerge in contemporary French life, and the scandal that has surrounded Oh la Loi, the Bouchareb's film last year, was indicative of that, and the ongoing remarkable statements by the current president of the French Republic, Nicolas Sarkozy, who's had the audacity to say things of the kind that Africa has had no history and so on. So the present transformations that we're seeing right now, the YouTubes, the cell phone videos, guerrilla cinema, seems to me to be opening then a new movement, very like the one that took place 40 years ago, drawing on those revolutionary traditions quite clearly, it seems to me, but also creating something very different in that we're now addressing directly and immediately a transnational audience. And the sense that I have is that new media and young people were and are central to the process of decolonization. And it's clear that locally the region is not going to be the same, but globally also, it's already been said, we are facing a crisis of contemporary visuality. The three possible outcomes that I see for that: we may see a new authoritarianism. That's clearly what certain world leaders are hoping for. There's a possibility. That's supposed to be a joke. The second possibility is that I think, a return to the status quo, ante, in other words, that somehow this will all go away, and day by day, luckily, that seems less and less likely. And there's a third possibility, the least likely, but the most positive and optimistic one, that there may be a new visualizing of the global that finally allows us to claim what we might call the right to look. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbaye Cham, and I would also like to thank Jessica Martinez, Dr. Cole, for bringing us here and organizing this fantastic conference and festival on North African cinema. I want to address, just for a small time, the institutional role in Algerian and African cinema, because I think that Danny is right in a way. We should be asking Ahmed Bedjaoui questions. He's been very modest, both in his role as a Cinematheque person, director of the Cinematheque, but also his role as producer of African cinema, Algerian cinema. Because when we look at Algeria from 1969 to 2009, what we find is that between 69 and 75, not only that we had great films, Mbaye Cham was mentioning the Mujahid cinema, films like a Chronicle of the Years of Amber, films like Le Charbonnier, but all the way to an attempt to get out of the war films, the heroic films, to a new Africa, a new Algeria cinema with films like Omar Gatlato, where suddenly you had comedy, which was a rare phenomenon in African cinema as a whole. People laughing at themselves, people looking at what Ahmed Bedjaoui was talking about earlier, people looking at their own alienation, that alienation being a product of European culture, of Islamic Arab culture, but also of African culture, how that could be mixed in a kind of fourth culture in a way. People looking at this alienation was very important in films like Omar Gatlato. So Algerian from 69 to 75, all the way to late 70s, made great films that, that I, as a film student in the United States, during that time, was very proud to see, because the cinema that was really in vogue in those days, of course, you had the French New Wave, you have the Italian neorealism, but you had the Brazilian cinema novo coming, you had the Argentinian third cinema coming, what you mentioned as a guerrilla cinema here, but you had Cuban cinema coming as imperfect cinema. This is cinema that refused the Hollywood film language, and then the Mujahid cinema was coming. The Algerians were coming with a film language that, at UCLA, I remember those days behind an Ethiopian professor called Professor Teshome Gabriel. He was a specialist of these cinemas, and we were all gathered around him when he showed Samben Usman along with like Darhamina or Bois-Marie and people like that. And we realized that we had a cinema. And of course, many people do not realize, but what we call today the LA Rebellion with Charles Burnett, Billy Woodbury, Julie Dash, they were watching those films. They are very proud for coming out of that tradition. So Algerian cinema itself was very important in that sense, but institutionally is really where the significance of Algerian cinema lies, because not only the cinematheque, but what Bedjaoui is not addressing here is what we call in African cinema la Charte d'Alger, the Alger Charter. The Alger Charter is in 1675, roughly. The idea was that every African country should organize its own national cinema, organize filmmakers in this national cinema, and have the and also take over distribution of cinema in Africa, because in those days everybody agreed that Hollywood was colonizing screens everywhere. I mean, this is not new today. Hollywood is doing the same thing everywhere. You know, French people are fighting it, Europeans are fighting it, but you can think of what that was happening in Africa. We were hungry for African images. So the Algiers Charter wanted us to liberate our own screens, to organize, to nationalize the movie theaters, and to organize the filmmakers, and to have film festivals. And I think that the Cinematheque was very important for that. And that is really what led to the cementing of festivals like Carthage and festivals like Ouagadougou, the Pan-African Film Festival of Ouagadougou. Dr. Cham was actually very humble because he is the next president of the jury in Ouagadougou. So, you know, he's the main guy that we need to corrupt to get our films to win. You know? So institutionally, Algeria is very important in that sense. And as we all know, in the 90s, this all came to an end. It came to an end because of what you hear in Algiers, La Décennie Noire, you know, the Black Decade, you know, where the Islamists took over and literally drove out the intellectuals, killed the cinema, killed culture in Algiers. And you know, Algerians will be able to talk more eloquently about the complexity of this than myself. But this decade literally turned all of us away from Algeria. And because they organized the 2009 festival that we're talking about now, we all went back to Algeria, because in the back of our mind, you know, we would say, what country in Africa could take the role that Algeria used to have in between 69, 75, all the way to 1980? South Africa came, we had a lot of hopes, but South Africa is going the Hollywood way. South Africa is not into organizing continental culture and cinema. They want films that make money, and I think that is okay too. Morocco is trying, Ouagadougou is trying, but they are trying with European money most of the time. Money raised in Brussels at the European Union. And this money, not only it has strings attached to it, but also, you know, it's not an African production. So when Algeria came back in 2009, one of the things that Bedjaoui did that he's not talking about, I think he selected, in my mind, is 10 films. It could be a little less or a little more. What they gave 50,000 to African filmmakers from all over Africa to make a 5-minute film of what Africa is to them, whatever it is. So they began that, and they also created a production fund in Algeria and challenged other African countries to join them to put in money and have an African production, because the idea was to look into Africa. And so in many ways, when Ahmed talks about Khalida Toumi, the Minister of Culture, saying, we won the night, it was so important because it was a way of saying that this decade of everything that we know that Danny's been talking about, that you talked about so eloquently recently, what's going to happen? Algeria had already began that with the PANAF, looking beyond, toward a moment of secularism, freedom for women, employment for younger people, and so on. Algeria began this in 2009. Where they're taking it is really what, these are the questions that are being raised. Will they be able to take it? What else is needed in Algeria and in Africa? What do we do about corruption? Because many people think that Algeria, because they have a republic, are already able to go there. But because of corruption, what is going to happen? These are some of the issues that are being raised. But Africa definitely is looking up to what are you going to do and what Algeria is going to do in terms of African cinema. Thank you.
Mancha.
I want to thank the lovely demonstration of women power that brought Lili to organize this, and our sister director now, director of the African Art Museum, Janetta Cole, who has been inspiring and demonstrating woman power for a long time, particularly in Atlanta, where I came from, and Jessica Martinez, who put all this together. It's very, very interesting. I think it's, well, this is how the world works. This is how movements work. You know, the women put it together and then the men talk. That's the way it is. I'm not opposed. I'm not opposed. But I was back in Algeria for this second Pan-African Cultural Festival, which was an absolutely extraordinary, phenomenal event for everyone, and particularly for me, in the sense that I was at the first one. I was at this amazing Pan-African Cultural Festival in 1969. Now, my group, the Black Panther Party, was invited. We were invited because one of the profound themes of the first Pan-African Cultural Festival, which was hosted in Algeria for the Organization of African Unity. And when the organization, this is the moment of liberation, and liberation was the theme. Culture as a weapon of liberation. And the liberation movements were there. They were in the parade. They invited Black Panthers. The central cultural performance of the first Pan-African Cultural Festival was Miriam Makeba. People were still talking about Miriam Makeba when I came to 40 years later, and about that performance. But Miriam Makeba was a South African who couldn't even live in her own country. I mean, so she was a symbol of liberation. And her husband, Stokely Carmichael, he was a symbol of liberation. He decided he couldn't live in his own country. But in my husband's case, they told him he was going to prison, and he said he'd rather go somewhere else, and he ends up in Algeria, clandestinely. We were hiding in Algeria in June. And then some things happened, and we found out that there was, actually we were told that the Algerians were angry and we had to get out. And so he didn't like that, and we, through African liberation friends, ZAPU, I think Charles Chikarima was in ZAPU, Zimbabwe African People's Union, said, I will check for you. And he went and talked to some people who he knew in Algeria who supported liberation, and they said, no, they don't even know you're here. But now that they know, someone came to the hotel and said, oh, we're planning the festival. We want to invite you. I have the list on the invitation list for America. But between now and then, you'll have to hide. So we went into hiding in Algeria until about July, and I was pregnant. So I was sort of in a hurry to come out of hiding because I think the festival began July 17th. And my son was born on July 28th. And I didn't do a lot of talking at that festival. But all I'm saying is that to talk about Algerian cinema, my experience was that the Algerian Revolution, we learned more about that revolution through cinema. Because we could see some newsreels, we could see some pictures. Algeria wasn't a lot on the wavelength in the United States. Cuba was closer, but it was there. And when the Africans started coming to the United Nations, and we say Sekou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah, and then the Algerians came too, but they were fighters. They didn't have on robes, they didn't have berets and glasses. I mean, they were so handsome and and exciting. And this was our look. They looked like what we thought this is what revolutionaries look like. They wear jackets and berets and sunglasses. So did the Panthers. We were revolutionaries, you know. We're down with the cause. So in '68, was it '68 that Battle of Algiers came? Or was it '66? '66. No, okay, there was a screening in New York. I know it was '68 then.
Yeah, it was '68.
Because it was for the SNCC people. Rap Brown was there, I was there. It was in some, maybe Film Forum, some small theater in New York. But it blew our minds. Blew everyone's minds. And so when we saw, and why? Because we were wrestling with what Fanon was talking about. What is resistance? How do you do it? How do you change yourself? How do you engage in a revolution? And what we really want to figure out is how do you really engage in urban guerrilla warfare? That's what we really wanted to figure out. We live in cities. All those liberation movements are out in the boonies. I mean, they're out in the woods. How could we do this? So when we see the Battle of Algiers, first of all, we see people that we can identify with. They kind of look like us, particularly the main character, Ali Lapointe, who I guess many women in Algiers were in love with too, but we were all in love with Ali Lapointe. But it was his transformation. That's what we were experiencing. Kids who live in the city, they don't have much education, they don't know how to do much. They end up somehow or other in prison, they discover revolution, they are transformed. And we were engaged in that process of transformation, and we learned about it in some sense from film. We learned about it from images, visual images. We learned about it by reading, and the music. But film was part of that, and the Black Panther Party in particular was very engaged in film. I think we had films that we used that were made by collectives called Newsreel. Mm-hmm. These were professional newscaster cameramen off work would bring their very high quality equipment and their skills and make films and then give us these little 15 or 20-minute documentaries that we could show wherever. And then when we got to Algeria, this is world stage. We were there for the festival. The decision came about, I'm not going to say how, to make a documentary about Eldridge Cleaver and the Black Panthers because he was there, and because the filmmaker William Klein was there, and because Bob Shear, who was the editor of Ramparts and Eldridge's employer, he was there. And you know, this was because they were in that fluid, because Ahmed Bedjaoui was there. That's why it got made. Yes, that's why, because Cinematheque was there. Yes, the truth comes out. And he was, I mean, I had just come back from the hospital with my baby, but I was in the film. I didn't say much. But, so I'm going to skip over a lot, but what I was going to, I'm now involved in writing, or have been for a very, very long time involved in writing a memoir, which the publishers really want. And I wanted to go to Algeria because there's a period of my life from 69 to 73 that's in Algeria. But Algeria, you talked about Algeria has haunted me ever since I left. And I wanted to go back, and I wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to know if the things I remember are actually the things. I felt I had to go there to write about it, but I couldn't because of the war. So I just wanted to go, but I didn't know how to get there. In March, I got a letter, March of 2009, I got a letter in this big envelope from the Algerian embassy, and I said, Algerian embassy? Open this letter, and it's an invitation from the Minister of Culture to come to Algeria to be in the opening ceremony of the 40th, of the second Pan-African Cultural Festival. It's the most amazing letter I'd gotten. I said, I get to go to Algeria. I was so excited, although it was difficult to get the communication. And so I wasn't getting any information. I got the visa information, but nothing. So finally I called the filmmaker in Paris, and I said, I knew she was planning part of the festival, and I said, I can't get any information. I don't know how I'm going to get there. What can you do to help me? Well, what she did was put Ahmed Bedjaoui on my case, and everything worked out perfectly. And little would I have known that this documentary that was made there, Algiers Cleaver, Black Panther, had been remade, remastered, and was scheduled for a film festival as part of the Pan-African Cultural Festival. I think it was on July 16th. But I didn't know anything about it. So when I met him, we were sitting in the hotel, and I said, I always had a question about who had the copyright, and that's another concern why, but it was some issues of film festivals and screenings that I had been involved in. I could never get the right to show Algiers Cleaver Black Panther. I would be turned down. You had to fill out a form, and I'd get turned down. So finally, well, I didn't tell you this, but finally I just made some bootlegs and would show bootlegs. But wouldn't advertise it. And in fact, I was invited to come to the American University in Beirut for a sort of a seminar, and they said, you need to make a talk. It's the graduate, something like departmental series. Make a talk and show a film. And I said, well, I'd like to show the film Algiers Cleaver Black Panther because I'm going to make my talk on the international section of the Black Panther Party, except I can't get the rights. Maybe you can get the rights. So we talked about it for a while, and I said, well, you know, I also can show a bootleg copy. And he said, oh, we insist. That's the kind of copies we want. In Beirut, we have to have the bootleg. I mean, that's what they do. So this fact that it has been remastered and it's distributed by a very powerful, big company, Arte, and it will be distributed. It makes a huge difference in terms of the access to that era of 40 years ago, which is what's so important about that film. Not the Algiers Cleaver part, but the liberation, the context, and when you recognize that the world that we're a part of hasn't moved that far. I mean, he's talking about the Vietnam War, but everything he said we could apply to the war in Iraq. And so we just, it's very significant that the revolutionary impulse, the liberatory impulse that swept across Africa into the United States, from the around, we were in the Black Panther Party, we were in Algeria doing exactly what the National Security Agency of the United States has a memo that says they do not want to see happen. This is what we do not want. They called us, I think, militants. The black militants should not be able to collaborate or contact or work with the African and Arab revolutionaries. So they didn't want that. We were sitting in Algiers, we had an office. That's what we did all day. So we were kind of in a dangerous, what do you call it? Sort of like in a dangerous position, but that wasn't how I saw it. I thought we were in a very powerful and significant, historically position. It's very difficult. And what's so tremendous, I think, about what we're doing now and what we're seeing now, well, we're doing now, we're talking about this, but we're seeing across the Maghreb, across North Africa, a revolutionary impulse. Where I don't say you're seeing a revolution, but you're seeing that impulse, and we identify. When I see the signs and the students in the streets, I mean the students, they're grown-ups now. They conceived of these plans when they were students. The people who organized in Cairo or in other cities, but when they were students, we conceived it, but when we were students, Danny was a student, I was a dropout. I became a student later when we were students, and we can understand that these are students and people, grown-ups, young adults, who want, what were the signs in the March on Washington in 1963? They wanted freedom. We wanted freedom. We wanted jobs. And we wanted an end to police brutality. And I get the feeling that that's what it was about in Cairo. They wanted freedom. They wanted jobs. And they definitely wanted an end to police brutality. And so we can understand that. We can identify that. And when you can see that in a country that is being portrayed as a source of terrorism, and we see people that are nonviolent, with signs that we can recognize, and we know that that's that same impulse I felt when I saw the young kids in Georgia on the front line saying, we want to vote, and we'll go to jail, and we'll do whatever, and until we get the right to vote, this country's going to, until we get the right to eat where we want, we're going to shut it down. Well, I saw that in Egypt. I have to confess. I tried every day. Every day I saw the, I said, but why am I doing this? And it's because it was so moving. It was so moving, it was so powerful. And to know that there's a country, a cinema, that's able to capture, understand, that can link the blacks in Africa, in the United States, in the diaspora, with all the other movements, and put this in film. This is a very powerful moment. I'm very pleased to be a part of it, and thank you very much for bringing me.
Bravo. Yeah. Bravo. Bravo.
Well, I mean, as you can see, I mean, we can go on forever, and we have such a rich wealth of experience here and memories. I know that you probably also, there are some people in the audience who probably might have some perspectives and also, more importantly, some questions. This is, as I said, a rare opportunity. So I'm listening to Danny. We'll open it up now for questions. I know that perhaps the panelists may have some reactions to some of what your other colleagues have said, but probably in the process of answering some of the questions and also reacting to these observations. There are two mics on the each aisle here. If you can just go ahead and line up and use them there. If you can also identify yourself, just to
this is Larbi Lezama. I'm originally from Algeria. I have two questions. The first one is for Mr. Bedjaoui and Mr. Glover. It deals with the funding of movies. As you know, producers and directors in Algeria as well as in Africa are at the mercy of the government's handouts. Funding is done by the governments. So how do we solve this problem, since we don't have a venture capital to finance and to sponsor this movie? That's number one. The second issue is censorship. In the case of Algeria, for example, Mr. Bedjaoui can correct me if I am wrong. I read in the newspapers in the last few weeks, Algerian director and producer wants to produce a movie about an Algerian revolutionary hero, Aban Ramdan, and he was denied by the Minister of Veterans because the movie did not meet the guidelines set up by the Ministry of Veterans, Revolutionary Veterans. So how do you solve this kind of problem, censorship?
So it was about censorship and funding, yes.
Funding and censorship.
You want to take questions or answers? You want him to answer first, or you want to take?
Maybe you can take a few okay, questions. Well, we'll do it the Francophone way. We'll take a series of questions and then answer them in a group, right?
Is it a Francophone?
Yeah, it's
okay.
basically a Francophone. Basically, right.
It's a Gambian one, no?
An inquiring mind wants to know the problems that we're having in the state of Wisconsin. Can we associate that with what's going on in Africa? And also, is there a fear that revolution will spread across the United States?
Good afternoon, my name is Meher. I just had a question. As a non-French speaker, I know a lot of the films in North Africa have been really influential, but they use French or Arabic. And I'm trying to understand what are some of the ways moving forward that films across Africa can convey a lot of the themes and similar experiences they have, but with languages that are more accessible to regular Americans like me. It's very hard to kind of look at the similarities when you can't speak the language. And I think the diversity in that sometimes is a challenge.
Shall I start?
Okay. I think the first question was directed to you.
Yeah.
Ahmed, so
Yeah, there were two questions about funding. The funding African cinema as a whole is a major issue. And as I said, we are trying to promote an African fund, and we have two directions. One from the FEPACI, which wants an African fund under the umbrella of Francophonia to replace the capacities of France, which are getting lower as the European Union is getting higher with the Lisbon Protocol. And so times are changing. And the second one is the position of Algeria, where we want to have the umbrella of African Union. We have organized the two Pan-African film festivals, Pan-African cultural festivals under the umbrella of African unity. And we don't want to get out of this movement, unified movement. So we want to have a certain number of major countries, I mean major in terms of financial capacities, that will give a contribution and then open the way to a foundation which will be able to collect funds from private or public sectors. So we are discussing these two issues, and we hope to find a solution in between. In the meantime, we have, during the film festival, I was the president of African Fund for Cinema, and we funded 8 films, 4 feature films and 4 documentary films, or short films, trying to impulse the movement, just to show that African can also finance and fund the African cinema, and not only count, as you said, permanently to rely on the European fundings, in fact, mainly the French fundings. Because the Germans and other countries are less and less involved in funding cinema in Africa. So the impact on the level, on the volume of film production in Africa is visible now. In Algeria, there is an Algerian film fund, which I'm the president, for which I'm president, and we have around $200 million for the Algerian cinema, or Algerian co-production. It means that we may also put money in co-productions like we did. People maybe didn't hear that when we were putting money in Outside the Law, we also contributed to the production of Le Premier Homme, adapted from Albert Camus, and directed by an Italian movie director. I'll remind his name. And we put money on that, even if our extremists have a different opinion on the role of Albert Camus on the War of Liberation. He was against the freedom of Algeria, and we had an offensive from our rightists, just like the French has had an offensive from the rightists against Outside the Law. But we did both. I mean, we didn't hesitate to Gianni Amelio. Gianni Amelio was the director. He made a brilliant film. It's now at the end of the post-production, and it will be presented in Cannes in next festival. And the whole film, 100% was shot in Algeria. Shot in Algeria with everything built in Algeria and everything. So there is a diversity. If we think that this film is linked to Algeria, and even if we are not, we do not agree 100%, why not? It's part of our history. Even if it's controversial, it's also part of life. We are also we are starting the production of a film by a French-American filmmaker called Philippe Diaz on the last months of Karl Marx in Algeria. He lived in Algeria. He finished his life in Algeria, so many people ignore that. But he spent 6 or 8 months in Algeria, and he's making a film on that. It's part of the history of Algeria. So I'm really in this commission for the Film Fund trying to promote all the films that have a direct or indirect relation to Algeria. Again, even if we cannot approve everything, but we are not disapproving. Okay, it's cinema is a diversity. Let me also say something on the last days of a few days of respite, which was presented in selection competition in Sundance, in the Sundance Festival in January, last January, a few weeks ago. It's a film about two marginal people, marginal for many points of view. They are coming from Iran. They are leaving the country because they are persecuted in Iran. They are intellectuals and they are homosexuals. And they are trying to find refuge in France. And they asked me to give my word with the people who are in the commission. Is it this sort of image that you want to promote in Algeria? I said, well, this is an Algerian filmmaker, Ammar Hakar. He made a wonderful film, the Yellow, La Maison Jaune, Willow House, a wonderful film that I love. And I'm just reacting to my impulse, to my love. I love it, so I'm going to support it. And these two gentlemen are expelled by the country which has created the human rights, France. And when they came back in factual history, they were executed. They were expelled from France, and when they came back to Iran, they were expelled. So this is also the sort of film that we are supporting. Of course, and nevertheless, there is a problem for funding films because the films are costing more and more, and the Algerian fund cannot finance the cinema. It's not fair, it's not correct. We should promote a market, and we should have other sources of financing. Television is trying to do something, and the link is made with the Ministry of Mujahideen, which is supporting financially some films related to the war of revolution. They are trying to revive this theme and this topic. So they put a lot of money on it. And one of the films that were submitted to us was Krim Belkacem by Ahmed Rashdi. And the law in Algeria, which was supported by this ministry, is compelling us to submit the script, even if we approve it technically, artistically, to submit it to the experts of this. And the issue and the controversy was about should we name, not the content of the film, but should we name the persons like Ben Ramdan, Krim Belkacem, because if you look at the Battle of Algiers, if you look at Outside the Law, nobody is identified because it was a popular revolution. Forgetting that it was a popular revolution and we had only one hero, it was the slogan, one hero, the people. Of course, some of them were they had to lead something because it's a revolution, it's a war for liberation. But when you look at Ali Lapointe, he was a bad guy before the revolution. And then he became a hero. Mm-hmm. So he was a man from the people. He was not shaped for becoming a hero. So this is the issue. We can, if you change the names and you present the film as a work of a fictional work, as a work of fiction with names which are not the real names, you're not hurting the interpretation of history because some people are still alive. Maybe it's not yet the time to interpret on cinema the historical facts. I don't know. But the controversy is still going on in Algeria, and I have no...
This doesn't make sense. You have many movies where they name the heroes, Ahmad Badawi, and you go on and on. How come this special one...
No, Ben Ramadan where? Yes, Ben Boul'id, yes, but Bouamama is the last century. The historian... Sorry. The history... Yeah.
If you can answer the second question about censorship, and then we can...
Yes, this one is about censorship. Yeah, it's about censorship.
Sorry.
The fact is that many people say that the historians have not yet finished telling about the reality of the Algerian Revolution. I'm also the producer of Bouamama. And Bouamama belongs to the 19th century. And we have specialists, and the history has completely come. If you look at the controversy about outside the law in France, there is still a lot of discussion because the French refused to accept that May 45, the riots in May 45, were a massacre. And they, so this is the point. I mean, maybe because people are still living, maybe their families are still there, and it's opening the way to so many things. But if you look at, again, at the Battle of Algiers, le Général Massu was called Durand. And he didn't want to hurt the person because he was still living, and he was a very high-ranking officer in the French army at that time.
Okay, there was a second question.
About Wisconsin.
Yeah. I mean, if we can establish some kind of equivalence or comparison between Madison, Wisconsin, my alma mater, and Eileen also, and what's going on in North Africa today? Any perspectives on that?
Well, one of the things that we find apparent as we look at Wisconsin and understanding Wisconsin is a very important state in the Midwest with very, very, very strong labor laws that protect the right for workers, public workers, to collective bargaining, in a sense. So the attempt by the Republican administration to run roughshod over these particular laws and basically change these laws wipes out a long history of activism that brought about these particular laws in Wisconsin, and those laws are reflective of other laws in other states as well. If we want to look at that in relationship specifically to the working middle class, which have been devastated over the last 30 years, 35 years. In fact, real income for the working class, the average American worker, has been stagnant over the last 35 years. If we look at that relationship to families being forced deeper and deeper into poverty in middle-class America, in the heartland of America, take that and see what is happening in Egypt and other places where young people out, as Kathleen said, young people who had began to shape their ideas as students were now in the workplace and no longer had no opportunities within the workplace. I mean, there are conclusions, and I think they're important conclusions we have to draw in reference to the economic paradigm in which we exist in and which has affected exactly the entire world. Not simply just the United States as we look at American workers, but workers from all over the world. Take, for instance, just a few weeks before the governor introduces the attempts to change the Constitution and the right for workers in Wisconsin, he gives these major tax breaks to corporations and multi-level corporations, multinational corporations at the same time that operate within Wisconsin. One of the things that I wanted to say, and just to take a little bit further, the difficulty in funding the film, as I said to someone, if you don't wear, in Hollywood, if you don't wear a mask and 20 years old and a cape, it's almost impossible for you to work. The difficulty in funding the film, it's real. It's really, you know, and finding money to fund the film and being engaged and finding the money to do the kind of work that, what I believe, and several people have mentioned that word, is transformative. Finding the resources, finding the money, having a place to go. It's impossible. We were involved in trying to find money for a film that was going to be shot both in Algeria and in Paris during the Vichy regime. We thought the film Free Men was an important film because it dealt with the role that Muslims played in sheltering Jews in Paris during the Vichy regime, which is important to talk about. At the same time, we see in 1942, toward the end of World War II, the elements of fascism that we find, and also the beginning emergence of the revolution to come about in Algeria. And finding money to fund those kind of films, or fund a film that we were trying to do over the last 5 or 6 years on France Fanon. After several conversations with the great Palestinian Edward Said, we were interested in looking at Frantz Fanon's interpretation of violence and how that interpretation of violence finds itself in the 21st century. And we find it difficult to kind of find those kind of, to get the resources to do those kind of films, you know, because there's no place for them often, you know, and certainly to find and to begin to develop those kind of resources are important if we're going to look at this cultural explosion, this cultural expression, and have this expression take root, as it did from that period of 1969 to 1975 and through the early 80s, or before, the late 70s.
And the third question was on language.
I'll respond to that in a way, because I know exactly what you mean. When you go in a culture and everyone's speaking a foreign language, until you learn that language, you can't communicate. I mean, your communication is diminished. But what I would say is that it is worth the effort to see films in subtitles. And I'll tell you why, because sound can be dubbed, but that's way, way, way more expensive to have, you know, like on the DVDs where you can press English or Portuguese or whatever. That's an expensive film. It's a lot cheaper to get somebody to type the translation and put a strip underneath. So in terms of the type of, I mean, I was always stunned that people said they don't like to watch subtitles. When I was in high school, I liked to watch foreign films, and they were in subtitles. And so it may be an issue of festival, I mean, access to, like this, access to festivals where certain types of films are all brought together. I mean, I love film festivals. I think there should be film festivals for all sorts, all the time. It shouldn't be a remote thing. It should be an accessible, recognizable, like a film festival on television or something, where people can see, have a broader language and a broader understanding. For example, I'm sure if every public school had an African film festival, right? Every public school had an African film festival, then little children would come out of school knowing something about Africans that's intelligent. Just to be a comment, in 1971, our group was invited, our Black Panthers were invited to a conference in the People's Republic of the Congo. This is Congo Brazzaville. And so 1971, maybe that's a long time ago. But when we get down there, we met a soldier who was one of our guides who had gone to college in San Francisco. And he told us that when he came from the Congo to San Francisco, black people asked him about Tarzan, you know, where did he live? I mean, these are the ideas that black people had about Africa. So I thought that was pretty remote, and I was having a discussion with one of my own Panther sisters who was on the delegation with me when we would get to Brazzaville, and I said, well, what were your reactions? She said, oh, it was a modern city. You know, like, I mean, never even thought about that. Yeah, they had buildings, they had roads, it was airports. Yeah, but she'd never been to Africa. So in Queens, where she was living, and she was in the Black Panther Party, she was in the Young Lords. I mean, she'd been to Puerto Rico, but somehow or other, she was surprised to see that Brazzaville was, no. So we have ignorance, you know, and it's not as bad now. It's not as bad now. But, or maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe it is as bad now. Maybe it's worse. I don't know, because school systems are terrible now compared to when she went to elementary school. But I just think it's worth the effort, and that the kinds of work that you're talking about and the kind of effort you're talking about, we're so overwhelmed with commercial junk that passes for films that you get, your mind doesn't function effectively. I mean, the type of films you talk about when you say they're magical. They're extraordinary. I mean, when do you go to a Hollywood movie and say, it's magical? Anyway, that's my comment.
That's one thing. There's one thing about the question of translation, which is something we can all do something about. Funding for foreign language education in this country is disappearing daily.
Yeah.
French is a language that's very rarely taught in American universities, let alone high schools. I know there's from practical experience trying to get my daughter into New York City high schools. Nobody teaches French anymore, let alone German, and so on. And yet we speak every day about globalization. The second aspect of this, just following up from Kathleen's point, there are global film festivals going on every day online. And I would recommend you to go to a site called arabshort.net, which has a series of short films funded by the Goethe Institute and other folks, which has a subset for Algeria. There are 9 films on that site made by very young Algerian filmmakers, men and women of different kinds, very striking pieces of work ranging from 8 minutes to half an hour, documentary, fiction, music films, and across the web. You know, that seemed to me, in the interim between the place where we are now, where you still need folks like Danny Glover going up fighting for film funding, and how we're going to get proper streaming video online that will actually be high definition, top quality, and so on. We're not there yet. You can see that coming very soon, right? But there are these interim things like the short film that you can find online.
Some good news, though. I'm on the board of Link Television, and we was last month in a board meeting trying to figure out how we're going to raise money. Link Television was one of the few places where you can get Al Jazeera English, and all of a sudden, our presence was elevated. You know.
Great. So you can shoot while I'm moderator.
Yeah.
Ask your question while I'm moderator.
Just there is something.
Time management here. So I'm sorry, we'll take 2 more.
Okay. Okay. Sure.
Yeah, she's first. Go ahead.
I defer to my sister over there.
You were there first. You were waiting first. Go on.
No, she was waiting first.
Yeah, smart.
All right, I'll go. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. This was just so moving and so touching. And being Algerian and being so disconnected from my culture, being raised here, this is just such an enriching experience. So thank you so much for everybody who put this together. My first question was, it seems to me when we talk about the past, there was a lot more connection between the African diaspora here and the African, the continent. And I was curious to know if there are any efforts for collaboration right now between filmmakers from the African diaspora here and between filmmakers in Africa, whether Algeria or otherwise. That was question one. So my second question was, with all due respect, La Bataille d'Alger was a famous, nobody contests how great that film was, but I'm so tired of hearing about Algeria just in relation to the revolution, and I'm so glad you mentioned La Maison Jaune, because I saw it last year at one of the film festivals I attended, and I was curious to know if there are other films like that that talk about very human, everyday, universal experiences like grief, like family, like joy, like love. I just love to know what's been going on. And pardon me, this is stemming from some of my ignorance about Algerian film. But thank you.
Actually, the sister there asked, her question one was close to my question one, so that's good. The only thing I wanted to ask is about resources for younger filmmakers. And of course, you've all spoken about how difficult it is to get funding for films, but then there's all this new technology, and the revolutions are being televised with YouTube and so on. Is there any kind of concerted effort to get young people who are working with the moving image together to talk about not only the content, and this is all over the African world, to talk about the content as well as new modalities for getting narratives into the public domain. And thank you for this dream panel.
First, I would like to express my gratitude for Mr. Bedjaoui for influencing a whole generation about the love of movie. You know, I remember we used to watch his Dossier de l'Écran. I was little kid. I'm from a popular neighborhood which is called Bellecour, and we had like 8 movie theater in a small neighborhood, and cinema was big part of our education, and we had a dream and we love to dream. I mean, generation now, I was back home a month ago. They don't dream anymore, so we have to get them to dream again. Thank you.
Can I say something real quick? I just want to say something because a number of us come out of a particular struggle. I'm a filmmaker. I started out working in community development, so I'm a filmmaker that came out of a process that evolved, where I found that the expressions that I wanted to say were about how do people struggle on an everyday basis, how do people find a voice in everything else. And with all due respect, one of the things that I realized is that there's some stories that people don't want you to hear. They don't want you to talk about. I've tried for the majority of my career to do a film on the Haitian Revolution, on something that happened, that transformed the world. And yet for some reason, every time there's an opportunity to do such a story, we're crushed by it. Now, I think that imposing such a story on an audience could maybe say to them that we too can challenge the empire, that we too can say, go through or make the transform our world. What happened and what's happening now are going to be told by filmmakers for years. What's happening in North Africa, what's happening, and which is not only exclusive to North Africa, but it's exclusive to places that we didn't believe that the word could get there. It's not inclusive of places in which we didn't believe the word could get there. So sometimes we sound like we talk about a revolution, but and we're going to save this precious planet that my sister here talks about. The only way we're going to save it, the only way we're going to save ourselves in the human species is to talk about a revolution.
Mancha, you want to take briefly the question about relations between filmmakers in the diaspora and...
Well, yeah.
Very briefly.
Very briefly, I just sent the question to 2009, right, where we took the African American filmmakers from here. I was organizing it, long list, and took them to Algiers. And the welcome was just fantastic. And we're trying to do more work. Danny was there. They had meetings with Danny, but there were other filmmakers from the Los Angeles Rebellion, from all over the United States, but also from the Caribbean and Brazil and so on. So yes, there is a very dynamic, energetic relationship that will be carried over to Ouagadougou in a couple of weeks. And the Minister of Culture of Algeria will be represented in Ouagadougou, so yeah.
And in addition, also just recently at the FESMAN, the Black Festival, World Festival of Black Arts that just took place in Senegal in December. Dakar, yes. There was also a sizable delegation of African-American filmmakers, Julie Dash, Casey Lemons, and Danny was there, Mancha was there, among other people also. And there were a lot of debates and exchanges also relating to this particular issue. Yes.
Yeah, there was questions about the new themes, new films, new themes in Algerian cinema, dreams and things like that. I want just to connect with a previous question about the languages and say something which is queer about the co-productions between France and Algeria, because we have a lot of filmmakers living in France or living in Algeria and co-producing. And the problem, the language issue raised at a time because the French imposed to give funding or support, financial support, to have more than 50% of the language in French. And we have the same in Algeria. So when you have a co-production, it was impossible to co-produce. So we compromised and we said about 50%, which is, in this view, I would like to say that among the new generation, the new films, I mentioned the film by Amr Hakkar, A Few Days of Respite, which is a new theme, very bold, very personal and everything. But his former film, La Maison Jaune, was spoken in Berber, completely in Berber. So in our law, we have it should be spoken in a majority of the two national languages, Arabic or Berber. So this one, La Maison Jaune, was the first major. We have a lot. We have a festival of Amazigh film, of Berber films, North African, because we have people coming from Morocco often. And but this one was the first major film made and successful made in Berber. As about the new themes, I think that if we mention these films, if we mention the Tarek Tegia films like Inland, for example, or Roma Walantum, films like that.
Bye Bye Alger.
Bye Bye Alger, yes. Bye Bye Alger. It's called in English Bye Bye Alger. Yeah. Or films by Zohra Zamoum, Zhar. We have also Masquerade, which is a comedy. It's a sort of new act after Omar Gatletou, because it's a comedy about love, about How can, in the relations between two boys, how can love insert itself? Because one of the guys is in love with the sister of the others, and it's something which was in the past really difficult. So he had to cope with the situation, to accept the situation, and we are laughing every time. But so the Algerian cinema is in between two generations. The new generation, the new filmmakers who are promoting new themes about love, about marriage, about employment, about I can also mention a filmmaker that I like very much. It's Nadir Moknash with the Delis Paloma, for example, which was very critical, or Viva l'Algérie. I love this filmmaker. I think he's a very powerful filmmaker. So you have a lot of new themes, but at the same time we're at the end of a period of a generation of revolutionary men who want to tell revolution because they are afraid that the new generation will not be able to do it, which is completely unacceptable, because I think I really believe that the new generation in a few years, they will be able to tell much better than people who have lived that from the inside without any. So we are in between these two. The encouragement of revolutionary film, because the new generation, they say, should know about the history of Algeria. But in between these two poles, we have Outside the Law, which is a political thriller, a revolutionary thriller, which is combination of the two. Maybe the talent is the real issue.
On that optimistic note, and there's also, I think, what is touted as the first Algerian musical.
Yes, that's right. Zaha, which is a very new theme, because it's a musical. It's the first musical. Right. It's a very successful. It's about young people, young girls and young boys, far from any political consideration or anything like that, and they want to live. They want to be happy. They want to love. Very simple things.
Okay, wasn't this wonderful? Wasn't this wonderful? Well, once again, thank you very much for the organizers, Jessica, Dr. Cole. I mean, this was really amazing. And Lydie, merci beaucoup. Thank you. And please join me in thanking the panel. And Ahmed is going to introduce the film, and then we'll look at it, and hopefully if there's time, afterwards we might be able to entertain some questions.
Very rapidly, this film is the second stage of the films we made on the Pan-African cultural festivals. The first one was made by Bill Klein, and while he was there, he asked, because he was American and he wanted to make something on Eldridge Cleaver. And he made this film. But for some reasons, I'm just opening parentheses, for some reasons, these films were almost lost. And before the second second Pan-African Festival, I made many efforts to find the elements for the films at the laboratory in France. And they told me that one of them had been victim of fire. It was the Cleaver. I said, okay, I'm going to call my lawyer, and he will come to you. And suddenly, the day after, they say, well, we found out that it's still here. It's still here. And we made the digitalization of the two films, and we made also a contract with Arte, which distributed the DVDs. in the whole world. They are available everywhere. So, because I wanted to open the film festival inside the Pan-African Film Festival with the first film on the Pan-African by William Klein. And of course, at the same time, we wanted to keep a memory, because the best memory we have on the first Pan-African Festival was the Klein's film. It's a beautiful testimony, it's a beautiful documentary on what happened really and the atmosphere which prevailed at that time. We are so happy to have made this film, because without the talent of this man, maybe we would have just been able to talk about it, not to show something. And so we decided also that it was time for us to call for Algerians to make this film. One of them, there were two. One was producer and co-director, Salim Brahimi, and the second one, co-director, Shirki Kharoubi, who is one of the most talented filmmaker at the Belgian televisions. And we decided to put some capacity, because we had so many places where the events were occurring that it was difficult. We had to engage 8 teams all together to be at the same time in different places. So it was a very difficult film to prepare for me as a producer, but finally you will recognize some of these lady and gentlemen in the film, because they were the conducting thread, line to tell the story of Africa now and how this film was different from the 69 film. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.